The bathroom mirror had fogged over from her shower when Naomi Ashworth Kim saw it, a single, unmistakable smear of red lipstick. Not hers. Low on the collar of the white dress shirt Desung had worn to a late dinner meeting with investors. She stood very still, towel wrapped around her, watching the fog slowly clear around the evidence like the universe itself was pulling back a curtain she'd spent 3 years trying not to look behind. Not again. She thought of the first time 6 years ago now, a hotel receipt she'd found tucked into a jacket pocket, a woman's name she'd never learned, and the particular devastation of being 29 years old and newly married, discovering that the man who'd promised her forever had already broken it within 18 months. She'd cried for 3 days. He'd cried too, genuinely. She'd believed at the time flowers every day for a month, a promise carved so deep into his voice she'd felt it in her own chest. Never again, Naomi. I swear on everything I have. She'd believed him. The second time, 2 years later, had been a text message flashing across his phone screen during breakfast. Something he'd deleted too quickly, too guiltily, for her to fully read, though the shape of it last night was. And then nothing had told her enough. That time, he hadn't cried. He'd been quiet, ashamed, had thrown himself into therapy sessions twice a week for 4 months, had built her, unprompted, an entire wing of the house dedicated to her law practice, a physical monument to how much he claimed to value the life they were building. I'm fixing this, Naomi. I promise you, I'm becoming a better man. She'd believed him again. The third time 18 months ago had been worse, careless in a way that felt almost cruel. A woman's number saved under a fake contact name that auto-corrected wrong on his lock screen, visible for exactly 4 seconds before he'd snatched the phone away, long enough for Naomi's sharp legal mind to memorize every detail. That confrontation had been their worst screaming, a broken vase, Desung on his knees on their kitchen floor, sobbing in a way she'd never seen from a man who controlled 3 port cities' worth of dangerous business without ever raising his voice to anyone but her. He'd gone to a treatment facility for 6 weeks after that one. Actual inpatient care, at his own insistence, though she later learned his mother had made the arrangements and all but forced him through the door. She'd believed him a third time, because the version of him that came home from that facility had felt, for nearly a year, like an entirely different man. The fourth time had been 8 months ago. Smaller, almost a colleague's perfume lingering too long on his coat. An evening unaccounted for by 20 minutes he couldn't quite explain. She hadn't even fully confronted him about that one, exhausted by then in a way that went deeper than anger. A tired, hollowed-out weariness that made her wonder, quietly, privately, whether she was the problem for staying, or whether staying was simply the price of loving a man who had never quite finished becoming who he claimed he wanted to be. He'd noticed her withdrawal without her needing to say anything. He'd taken her to Paris for their anniversary. He'd stood in front of 300 guests at his own sister's wedding and given a toast about Naomi that had made grown men weep. Had called her the only good decision I've made with my whole heart. Had looked at her across that ballroom like she was the entire reason the world still made sense. And she had believed, finally, completely, that 4 times had been enough. That whatever demon lived in him had finally, truly been exorcised. Now she stood in their bathroom, towel wrapped around her shivering body, staring at a smear of lipstick on a collar that wasn't hers, and felt something inside her chest go cold and quiet in a way none of the previous 4 times had ever quite managed. Because this time, she noticed, she didn't feel like crying at all. She walked calmly into their bedroom, past Desung sleeping soundly, peacefully, without a single guilty crease in his relaxed face, and opened her closet. She began, methodically, without a single tear, to pack. Before we go any further, welcome back if you've been here before, and welcome if you're new. Drop your city or country below, I read every comment. Now, I need to be honest with you about something before we continue this one. I don't yet know exactly how far Naomi's story goes, or how Desung responds to what happens next. This is going to be an intense one, so if you want to know how this plays out, make sure you're subscribed, because I promise you, Where this leaves off is going to make you feel something. Okay, let's go back to that bedroom. Naomi worked with the precise, methodical focus she brought to closing arguments, folding, packing, labeling. Her 15 years of legal discipline channeled into something that felt, in this moment, almost merciful. Because if she let herself feel anything else, she wasn't certain she'd be able to finish. She was 3 drawers deep into her closet when Desung stirred behind her. Naomi? His voice was thick with sleep, confused by the sound of her moving. The early gray light barely creeping through the curtains. What time is it? What are you doing? She didn't turn around. Leaving, the word landed in the quiet room like a dropped glass. She heard the sheets shift rapidly as he sat up. Leaving, he repeated, disbelief coloring his voice. Naomi, what are you talking about? It's 5 a.m, your shirt, she said calmly, still folding. Still packing. The one from your late dinner meeting last night. There's lipstick on the collar. Not mine. The silence that followed was total, absolute, the particular silence of a man realizing, in real time, that the ground beneath him had just opened. Naomi, I can explain you can't, she said, and for the first time she turned to face him, and something in her expression, not rage, not tears, just an exhausted, absolute stillness made him go pale. Not this time. You know that as well as I do. It's not what you think, Desung said, scrambling out of bed, reaching for her, panic rising sharp in his voice. Nothing happened, Naomi. I swear on my life, it was a business dinner. One of the investor's assistants got too friendly. I pushed her away immediately. I promise you, Desung. Naomi's voice was quiet, level, cutting through his rising explanation with the same precision she used to dismantle opposing counsel's arguments in court. Do you remember what you told me after the 3rd time? Kneeling on our kitchen floor, after I threw that vase? His face went ashen. Naomi, you said, she continued, her voice unwavering, that if I ever caught even the smallest sign again, a text, a smell, anything, you would understand completely if I left without discussion, without explanation, without giving you a single chance to talk your way out of it. You made me promise, Desung. You said it would be the only way you could hold yourself accountable, because you didn't trust yourself to stop making excuses otherwise. She zipped the suitcase closed. I'm keeping the promise you asked me to keep. That was different, Desung said desperately, moving to block her path to the door. I was in a dark place. I said things you meant them, Naomi said. You meant them exactly as much as you meant every apology before this one. That's the part you don't understand, Desung. I don't actually think you're lying when you cry, when you apologize, when you build me entire wings of houses and give toasts at your sister's wedding. I think you mean every single word every single time. Her voice cracked. Finally, the first real fissure in her composure. That's what makes this so much worse. You're not a liar, Desung. You're just someone who keeps choosing, over and over, to become the man you promised me you'll be. And then, choosing, over and over, not to actually stay him. Desung's eyes filled with tears, his hands trembling as he reached for her again. Please, Naomi, please, I love you. I have loved you since the moment I met you. Whatever this looks like, it doesn't touch what I actually feel for you. I know you love me, Naomi said quietly, and something in the simple, devastating certainty of her voice made his hands fall still. I have never once doubted that you love me, Desung. That was never the problem. The problem is that loving me has apparently never once been enough to make you stop. She moved past him toward the door, suitcase in hand, and he grabbed her arm not roughly, but urgently, desperately. Where will you even go? He asked, his voice breaking. Naomi, please, just give me a chance to fix this, the way I fixed it every time before you didn't fix it the other times. Desung, Naomi said, gently removing his hand from her arm. You paused it. There's a difference, and I think somewhere deep down, you've always known that difference too. She walked out of their bedroom, down the sweeping staircase of the house he'd built for them, past the wing dedicated to her law practice that suddenly felt, in this moment, like the world's most expensive apology note, and out through the front door into the gray early morning light. Desung stood frozen at the top of the staircase, watching her go, and for the first time in his adult life, a life spent controlling shipping routes across 3 continents, negotiating with dangerous men without ever once losing his composure, surviving betrayals and assassination attempts that would have destroyed lesser men. Desung had absolutely no idea what to do next. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. He glanced at it numbly. A text from an unknown number, sent at 4:47 that morning, roughly the time Naomi must have discovered the caller. Unknown, last night was a mistake. I'm sorry. Please don't let this destroy your marriage. She deserves to know it meant nothing. If that helps. Desung stared at the message, understanding with sick, sudden clarity that the woman from last night, whoever she was, however brief and meaningless the encounter had genuinely felt to him in the moment, had somehow already anticipated exactly what he was about to lose, and had tried, 12 hours too late, to warn him. He looked out the window in time to see Naomi's car pulling out of the driveway, taillights disappearing down the quiet street, and felt, for the first time since he was a young man, clawing his way up through violence and fear to build the empire he now controlled. Something that felt uncomfortably, terrifyingly close to genuine helplessness. He had no idea, standing there in the gray morning light, that Naomi wasn't simply driving to a hotel to cool off. She was driving to the one place he had never once thought to look for her, because it belonged entirely to a version of her life that existed before him, one she had never fully shared, and one that was about to become the foundation for a decision that would change everything neither of them could yet see coming. Naomi drove for 2 hours before she stopped, not toward a hotel, not toward her sister's apartment in the city, but south, toward the coast, toward a modest house in a quiet fishing town she hadn't visited in almost 8 years. The woman who opened the door was in her 60s, silver-streaked locks pulled back from a face lined with the particular weathered grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime working outdoors. Her eyes widening in surprise before softening immediately into something warm and knowing. Naomi, Aunt Patrice pulled her into an embrace before Naomi had said a single word, seeming to understand, with the instant clarity of someone who'd raised her through her own mother's death 15 years earlier, exactly what kind of morning this had been. Come in, baby, whatever it is. Come in. Naomi sat at her aunt's kitchen table, the same worn wooden table where she'd done homework as a teenager after her mother passed, and finally, for the first time since seeing that lipstick smear, allowed herself to cry. 4 times, she said, once the worst of it had passed, Patrice's hand steady on her shoulder. I forgave him 4 times, Auntie. I don't even understand anymore why I did it. Why I kept believing him. Because you loved him, Patrice said simply, setting a cup of tea in front of her. And because loving someone who's genuinely, deeply broken makes you want to believe healing is just around the next corner, every single time. That's not weakness, baby. That's just what hope does to good people. I feel like a fool, Naomi said. I'm a partner at one of the top law firms in Seoul. I've built a career on reading people, on knowing exactly when someone's lying to me. And I let this man make a fool of me, over and over, for 6 years. You're not a fool, Patrice said firmly. You're a woman who married a man capable of real love and real cruelty existing in the same body. And you kept hoping the love would eventually win out permanently. That's not foolishness, Naomi. That's just what it costs to love someone complicated. She paused. The question isn't why you believed him before. The question is what you're going to do now that you clearly don't believe him anymore. Naomi wrapped both hands around her tea, staring into it like it might contain an answer. I don't know. I genuinely don't know, Auntie. Part of me wants to file for divorce today, this morning, before he can call me with another explanation I'm too tired to resist believing. She paused. And part of me is terrified that even now, even after everything, if he shows up on your doorstep crying, I'll let him in anyway. Then don't let him find you here, Patrice said simply. Stay as long as you need. Turn your phone off if you have to. Give yourself real distance before you make any decision, Naomi, not the kind of distance you can drive back from in 2 hours the moment he sends the right apology. Meanwhile, back at the house, Desung had spent the morning in a state bordering on genuine panic, calling Naomi's phone repeatedly, calling her law firm, calling her sister, who answered only to inform him, in language considerably less polite than her usual tone, that she had no idea where Naomi was, and wouldn't tell him even if she did. By early afternoon, desperate, he'd called Hae-won, his head of security, the same woman who had helped him navigate every crisis his organization had faced over the past decade. "I need you to find her," Desung said, his voice raw in a way Hae-won had rarely heard from him. "Sir," Hae-won said carefully, with respect if Mrs. Kim left voluntarily, tracking her location without her knowledge feels like exactly the kind of thing that would make the situation considerably worse, not better. "I don't care," Desung said. "I need to know she's safe. I need to know where she is." "I can confirm she's safe," Hae-won said. "Her car's GPS shows it's currently parked outside a residence in Gangwon County. I won't share the exact address, sir, and I'd strongly advise against showing up there uninvited." Gangwon County, Desung repeated slowly, something shifting in his memory. "That's where her aunt lives, the one who raised her after her mother passed." "I wouldn't know, sir," Hae-won said carefully. "But if I may offer some unsolicited advice, given 11 years of watching you handle every other crisis in your life by taking immediate, forceful action, go ahead. This is not a crisis you can solve the way you solve business disputes," Hae-won said. "Showing up uninvited, applying pressure, using resources to track her down, all of that will likely confirm exactly what she's probably already telling herself right now. That you don't actually respect her boundaries. That you only understand love as something to be controlled and managed, rather than something to be earned back, slowly, on her terms." Desung sat with that for a long moment, something in Hae-won's careful, measured words landing harder than he expected. "Then what do I do?" he said finally, his voice smaller than Hae-won had heard it in years. "Hae-won, I can't just do nothing. I can't just let her leave. I think," Hae-won said carefully, "that not doing something is precisely the first genuine act of respect you could offer her right now. Give her space, sir. Real space. Not 2 days of silence followed by an elaborate gesture designed to win her back through overwhelming effort." She paused. "You've spent 6 years, by your own account, apologizing through actions, trips, renovations, treatment programs. I wonder, sir, if Mrs. Kim doesn't need another grand gesture right now. I wonder if what she actually needs is to see whether you can survive, not immediately trying to fix this." Desung closed his eyes, the weight of Hae-won's words settling over him with uncomfortable clarity. "And if I give her that space," he said slowly, "and she decides she doesn't want to come back at all, then that will be her decision to make," Hae-won said gently. "The same way it's always technically been her decision, sir, even during the times she chose to stay." Desung ended the call and sat alone in the enormous, empty house he'd built for a marriage that suddenly felt, for the first time in 6 years, genuinely, terrifyingly uncertain, staring at a phone that remained stubbornly, completely silent. He had no way of knowing that 3 hours away, in a small kitchen overlooking the coast, Naomi had just made a decision of her own, one that had nothing to do with him showing up, and everything to do with a phone call she was about to make to a man she hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Naomi sat on her aunt's back porch that evening, watching the tide roll in, phone in her lap, scrolling through contacts she hadn't touched in years until she found the name she was looking for. Marcus Whitfield Jang. Her law school roommate's older brother, a divorce attorney who'd built one of the most formidable practices in the country, and more relevantly, tonight a man who'd once told her, half joking, half serious, over drinks at her own wedding 6 years ago, "If this doesn't work out, Naomi, you call me first. I mean it." She hadn't taken the comment seriously at the time. She'd been 29, radiantly in love, certain that whatever complicated darkness lived in Desung was something her love could eventually dissolve entirely. Now, 6 years and 4 betrayals later, she dialed his number. "Naomi Ashworth Kim," Marcus said, picking up on the third ring, genuine warmth in his voice despite the years of silence between them. "I have to say, I did not expect to hear from you tonight, But something tells me this isn't a social call. It's not, Naomi said, her voice steadier than she felt. Marcus, I need to talk to you professionally. About divorce. There was a pause on the line. The particular careful silence of a man recalibrating an old joke into something suddenly uncomfortably real. Tell me what happened, he said, his tone shifting fully into professional focus. She told him everything, 6 years compressed into a 15-minute conversation. 4 betrayals, 4 forgivenesses, and the 5th one this morning that had finally completely broken something inside her that the previous 4 hadn't managed to touch. Marcus listened without interrupting, the particular attentive silence of a man who'd heard hundreds of similar stories across his career, and understood, better than most, exactly how much courage it took to finally make this call. Naomi, he said finally, once she'd finished. I want to be honest with you about something before we discuss any legal strategy. Given who your husband is, given the scope of his business interests, his resources, his network, this is not going to be a simple, quiet divorce. If you're serious about this, you need to understand what you're potentially walking into. I understand, Naomi said. I've watched him handle disputes for 6 years, Marcus. I know exactly how thorough he can be when he wants something. Then you also understand, Marcus said carefully, that the version of him fighting to keep his marriage might look very different from the version of him you married. Desperate men, even genuinely loving ones, don't always fight fair, Naomi. I need you to be prepared for that possibility. Naomi was quiet for a moment, watching the last of the sunset disappear over the water. What would you recommend? As my attorney, if I hire you tonight? First, Marcus said, documentation. Everything, the pattern of infidelity, any financial irregularities you're aware of, anything relevant to both the divorce itself and, frankly, to protecting yourself during what could become a complicated process. Second, I'd recommend you not return to the shared residence until we've established clear legal footing. Given his resources, I want to make sure you're operating from a position of strength, not vulnerability, from the very beginning. He hasn't been violent, Naomi said quickly. I need you to understand that Marcus, whatever else he's done, he's never once been physically threatening toward me. I believe you, Marcus said. But Naomi, infidelity of this pattern, combined with his particular business background, means I'm going to advise caution regardless. Not because I think he'll hurt you physically. Because men who are used to controlling every variable in their professional lives sometimes struggle to accept losing control in their personal ones, and struggle in ways that can look very different from violence but still cause real harm. Naomi absorbed this, the weight of what she was actually setting in motion finally, fully settling over her. Okay, she said finally. I want to move forward. Send me whatever paperwork you need. I'll have documentation to you by tomorrow. I'll start preparing everything tonight, Marcus said. Naomi, for what it's worth, I know how difficult this call was to make. You're doing the right thing, protecting yourself after real repeated harm. That takes courage, regardless of how this ultimately unfolds. She ended the call and sat alone on the porch for a long time afterward, the tide continuing its steady, indifferent rhythm against the shore, feeling the particular hollow, terrifying relief of a decision finally, irreversibly made. Her phone buzzed. A text. Not from Desung this time, but from an unfamiliar number. Unknown. This is Hey One. Mr. Kim's head of security. I'm reaching out privately, not on his instructions. I wanted you to know he hasn't tried to locate you today, despite having the resources to do so easily. I thought that information might matter to you. Whatever you decide next. Naomi stared at the message for a long moment, something complicated moving through her chest, not quite hope, not quite forgiveness, but something that made the decision she'd just set in motion feel, for the first time since that morning, genuinely difficult rather than simply necessary. She typed back a single line. Why are you telling me this? The response came quickly. Hey One, because in 11 years working for him, I have never once seen him choose restraint over control, in any situation, personal or professional. I don't know what that means for your marriage, Mrs. Kim. I only know it's the first time I've seen him try. Naomi set the phone down slowly, staring out at the darkening water, the careful, methodical certainty that had carried her through this entire day suddenly, unexpectedly complicated by a single, unwelcome question she wasn't prepared to answer. What if this time is actually different? She thought of the 4 times before the flowers, the treatment facility, the toast at his sister's wedding, and how each one had felt, in its moment, like undeniable proof that he'd finally changed. She thought of the lipstick on the collar, and the calm, cold certainty she'd felt packing her suitcase that morning. And underneath both of those thoughts, quiet and unwelcome, she thought of something Marcus had said, almost in passing, during their call, a detail she hadn't fully processed until now. Men who are used to controlling every variable sometimes struggle in ways that can look very different from violence, but still cause real harm. She didn't yet know exactly what that meant. But sitting alone on her aunt's porch that night, phone dark in her lap, Naomi understood, with growing unease, that whatever Desung did next, restraint or desperation, patience or pressure, was about to reveal something about him she'd never actually had the chance to see clearly before. Because in 6 years of marriage, across 4 betrayals and 4 reconciliations, she had never once been the one to leave first. And she had no idea, yet, how a man who'd built an empire on never losing anything was actually going to respond to losing her. 3 days passed in careful, deliberate silence, no calls from Desung, no unexpected appearances at Patrice's door, nothing but the occasional update from Hae-won's private number, brief and factual, never pressuring, never asking Naomi to respond. Hae-won, he hasn't gone into the office in 3 days. First time in a decade. Hae-won, he had the wing you built your practice in sealed off. Told the staff not to enter it. I don't know what that means, but I thought you should know. Hae-won, he met with Marcus Whitfield Jang's office this morning. Voluntarily, he's not fighting the paperwork, Mrs. Kim. He signed the initial separation agreement without a single objection. Naomi read each message with growing, uneasy disbelief. The careful narrative she'd built around Desung, desperate, controlling, unable to accept losing anything, increasingly at odds with the picture Hae-won's brief updates were painting. He signed it, Naomi said quietly, showing her aunt the message on the 4th morning. The 2 of them sitting over coffee on the porch. No objections, no counterterms. Marcus said in 15 years of practice, he's never seen someone with Desung's resources sign an initial separation agreement without a single fight. What do you make of that? Patrice asked carefully. I don't know, Naomi admitted. Part of me wants to believe it means something. That maybe, finally, he understands he actually lost me this time. She wrapped both hands around her mug. And part of me is terrified it's just a different kind of manipulation, making himself look reasonable, patient, changed, so that when he does eventually reach out, it'll feel like proof he's finally different. Has he reached out? Patrice asked. Directly, I mean. Not through his security chief. No, Naomi said slowly, and saying it out loud made the reality of it land differently than she expected. Not once. 4 days, and he hasn't called, hasn't texted, hasn't shown up. That's auntie, that's never happened before. Even during our worst fights, he's never gone more than a few hours without trying to reach me. Patrice studied her niece carefully. How does that make you feel? Naomi considered the question honestly, surprised by her own answer. Unsettled, she admitted. Which is ridiculous, I know. I left him. I filed for divorce. I should be relieved he's respecting that. But some small, exhausted part of me, almost she stopped herself, shaking her head. It doesn't matter. It's probably just habit. 6 years of expecting him to chase me every time things got difficult. That evening, her phone rang, not a text this time, but an actual call, and Naomi's stomach dropped when she saw the name on the screen. Not Desung. His mother, Kang Soo-jin. Naomi hesitated only a moment before answering. Mrs. Kang, Naomi. The older woman's voice carried none of its usual formal reserve, something rawer, more urgent underneath it. I need to see you. Today, if possible. It's about my son. Mrs. Kang. I don't think, please, So-jin interrupted, something close to desperation entering her voice, a tone Naomi had never once heard from her formidable, composed mother-in-law in 6 years of marriage. This isn't about the divorce, Naomi. I'm not calling to convince you to come back. I promise you that. Something is wrong with Desung, and I don't know who else to call. Naomi felt her chest tighten with sudden, unwelcome alarm. What do you mean something's wrong? He won't eat, Sujin said, her voice cracking slightly. He won't leave the house. One called me yesterday, worried enough to break protocol, and when I went to see him myself this morning, Naomi, I have never seen my son like this. Not after the assassination attempt 8 years ago. Not after his father died. I am genuinely frightened for him. Naomi sat frozen on the porch, the careful protective distance she'd built over the past 4 days suddenly, violently disrupted by a fear she hadn't expected to feel. What are you asking me to do, Mrs. Kang? She said finally, her voice unsteady. I don't know, Sujin admitted. I'm not asking you to go back to him, Naomi. God knows, after everything he's done, I would understand completely if you never wanted to see him again. I'm asking you, as someone who has loved you as a daughter for 6 years, regardless of what my son has done to damage that, please. Just see him once. Not to reconcile. Just to see for yourself whether what I'm seeing is real. Naomi closed her eyes, the weight of the day pressing down on her. Marcus's careful legal warnings, One's quiet, unprompted updates, and now Desung's own mother, a woman who had every reason to defend her son unconditionally, sounding genuinely frightened rather than manipulative. I need to think, Naomi said finally. Of course, Sujin said quickly. Take whatever time you need. I needed you to know, whatever you decide. I didn't call to pressure you into anything, Naomi. I called because I'm scared. And I didn't know who else would understand exactly what's actually different about how he's behaving right now. The call ended, and Naomi sat alone on the porch for a long time afterward, the tide rolling steadily against the shore in the darkening evening light. Torn between 6 years of hard-won caution, and a fear she couldn't quite explain for a man who had broken her trust more times than she could easily forgive. Patrice found her there an hour later, still sitting motionless, phone dark in her lap. What did she want? Patrice asked gently. Naomi looked up at her aunt, something conflicted and frightened moving behind her eyes. She thinks something's wrong with him, Naomi said quietly. Really wrong, Auntie, not performance, not manipulation. She sounded terrified. And what do you think? Patrice asked. Naomi didn't answer right away, staring out at the dark water, the careful, protective certainty of the past 4 days, suddenly complicated by something she hadn't expected to feel again so soon. I think, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, that I don't actually know anymore. And I think that terrifies me more than anything he's ever done. Her phone buzzed one final time that night, not from Sujin, not from Won, but from Desung himself, the first message he'd sent in 4 days. She stared at his name on the screen for a long moment before opening it, her heart pounding in a way she hated herself for. The message contained no apology, no desperate pleading, none of the familiar patterns from the 4 times before. Just 6 words, sent at 11:47 that night. Desung, I understand if you never forgive me. Naomi read the message 3 times, searching for the manipulation she expected to find hidden somewhere in its simplicity, and found, unsettlingly, nothing but what appeared to be genuine, quiet resignation. She had no way of knowing, sitting alone on her aunt's porch with that message glowing on her screen, that 400 miles away, Desung sat in the dark of their empty bedroom, a half-packed bag on the floor beside him, staring at a single photograph from their wedding day. Having made a decision hours earlier that neither Won, nor his mother, nor Naomi herself had any idea was coming. Won found him at dawn, sitting exactly where she'd left him the night before, the wedding photograph still in his hands, a packed bag beside his feet. Sir, she stood in the doorway, careful, uncertain, having never once seen her employer in a state quite like this in 11 years of service. You haven't slept. I've been thinking, Desung said quietly, not looking up from the photograph. About something you said. about restraint. Sir, you told me not doing something might be the first genuine act of respect I could offer her, he said slowly. I've spent 4 days trying to understand what that actually means, beyond simply not calling her. He finally looked up, and Hae-won was startled by the clarity in his eyes, not the desperate panic of the past few days, but something calmer, more resolved. I think I finally understand. What are you planning, sir? Hae-won asked carefully. I'm stepping down, Desung said. Not from the legitimate businesses, the shipping companies, the logistics operations, those continue exactly as they are. But everything else. The parts of my life I've spent 6 years keeping compartmentalized from Naomi, telling myself I was protecting her by keeping her separate from that world. He set the photograph down carefully. I've called a meeting this morning. My lieutenants, my closest associates. I'm transferring control of every operation outside legitimate business to Jae-min. Hae-won stared at him, stunned. Sir, that's Jae-min is barely 30. The organization won't accept, they'll have to, Desung said simply. Because I'm done, Hae-won. Not performing, being done, the way I've performed change 4 times before. Hoping it would be enough to win her back. Actually done. I built an empire because I told myself, for years, that power was the only language capable of protecting the people I love. But somewhere along the way, I think I confused power with entitlement. And entitlement with the belief that Naomi's love was something I could always, eventually, buy back with grand enough gestures. Sir, Hae-won said slowly, you understand that stepping down from that world isn't simple. There are people who will see this as weakness, rivals who will see it as opportunity. I understand, Desung said. I've accounted for that. Jae-min is prepared, the transition plans are already drafted, and I've spent the last 4 days ensuring the organization's stability regardless of my personal involvement going forward. He paused. I'm not doing this because I expect it to win Naomi back, Hae-won. I want to be very clear about that. I don't believe grand gestures work anymore. Not after 4 times of proving they don't actually change anything permanent about who I am underneath them. Then why? Hae-won asked. Desung was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with more honesty than Hae-won had ever heard from him. Because I think, he said finally, that the man capable of maintaining control over an empire built on fear and violence, and the man capable of genuine, faithful love, I don't think those men can actually coexist indefinitely. I think I've been telling myself for 6 years that they could, that I could compartmentalize infidelity and cruelty into one part of my life, while keeping love pure and separate in another. And I think that lie is exactly what's cost me everything that actually mattered. He stood slowly, gathering the photograph, tucking it carefully into his jacket pocket. Whatever happens with Naomi, he continued, whether she ever forgives me, whether she ever lets me back into her life, in any capacity I need to become a different man regardless. Not for her. For whatever is actually left of who I was supposed to become, before I let power convince me I was entitled to take whatever I wanted, including loyalty I never actually earned. The meeting with his lieutenants that morning was, by all later accounts, unprecedented. Desung formally transferring control of every illegitimate operation, structuring an unusually generous exit package for himself that left Jae-min's new leadership financially secure, and walking out of the building that had housed his organization's true business for over a decade without a single backward glance. By afternoon, the news had spread through every relevant channel in the criminal underworld across 3 port cities. Desung, one of the most powerful men in the region, had voluntarily stepped down from everything except his legitimate shipping empire, motivations unclear, timing suspicious given the recent, widely rumored collapse of his marriage. Baek Chulmin, watching the news reach him through his own network late that evening, allowed himself a slow, calculating smile. Because a man stepping back from power, whatever his reasons, was a man temporarily vulnerable, and vulnerability, in Chulmin's experience, was always, eventually, an opportunity worth exploiting. Naomi learned about Desung's decision not from him directly, but from a brief, factual news alert on her phone that evening, sitting once again on her aunt's porch, watching the tide roll steadily against the shore, Breaking, sources confirm, Quan Desung has stepped down from all operations outside Quan shipping and logistics, effective immediately. Reasons for the sudden transition remain unclear. Naomi stared at the headline for a long time. The careful, protective distance she'd maintained for 5 days suddenly, completely upended by an action she had never once expected, in 6 years of marriage, that Desung would actually take. Her phone buzzed. Hey One again. Hey One, he didn't do this for leverage, Mrs. Kim. He doesn't know I'm telling you this. But I've worked for him for 11 years, and I have never once seen him give up power without expecting something in return. Until today. Naomi set the phone down slowly, her heart pounding with an emotion she couldn't fully name, not quite hope, not quite forgiveness, but something dangerously close to both, colliding directly with 5 days of hard-won certainty that she'd finally, permanently learned better than to believe in Desung's capacity for genuine change. She had no way of knowing, sitting alone in the gathering darkness, that the news of Desung's sudden vulnerability had already reached far more dangerous ears than her own, and that somewhere across the city, Bak Chol-min had just begun making calls of his own, setting in motion a plan that would, within days, put both Desung and Naomi in more danger than either of them had ever previously faced. 2 days later, Naomi finally agreed to see Desung not at the house, not anywhere that carried the weight of their shared life, but at a neutral cafe in the city, Marcus's careful legal boundaries firmly in place, a lawyer's advice ringing in her ears even as she walked through the door. Desung was already there when she arrived, and the sight of him made her stop short in the doorway. He looked thinner, exhausted, dressed simply in a plain sweater instead of his usual tailored suits, a man stripped, visibly, of the armor he'd worn for the entirety of their marriage. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly, rising as she approached the table. "Your mother asked me to check on you," Naomi said, sitting carefully across from him, maintaining the physical distance she'd promised herself she would. "This isn't a reconciliation, Desung. I need you to understand that clearly before we say anything else." "I understand," he said. "I'm not asking for one. I heard what Marcus told you, about desperate men not fighting fair. I want you to know I'm not fighting at all, Naomi. Whatever you decide about the divorce, I've already signed everything Marcus's office has sent." "I know," Naomi said carefully. "I saw. I also saw the news about your operations." Desung nodded slowly. "That wasn't for you. I need you to believe that, even though I understand if you can't." "Then why?" Naomi asked, the question she'd been carrying for 2 days finally escaping. He was quiet for a long moment, searching for words that felt honest rather than performed. "Because I finally understood something Hey One said to me, days ago. That I've never once, in my entire adult life, chosen restraint over control. I've spent 38 years building an identity around taking whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted it, and telling myself that was strength." He paused. "I think that same entitlement is exactly what let me believe, every single time I betrayed you, that I could simply take your forgiveness too, the same way I took everything else." Naomi felt something tighten in her chest, the honesty in his voice landing harder than any of his previous apologies ever had. "I'm not telling you this to win you back," Desung continued. "I don't think I've earned the right to ask for that, not after 4 times, and certainly not after a 5th. I'm telling you because you deserve to understand, finally, completely, that I recognize the pattern you've been living inside for 6 years. And I recognize that recognizing it, 5 betrayals too late, doesn't actually undo the damage." Naomi sat with his words for a long moment, watching this stripped-down, exhausted version of a man she'd loved and been devastated by in equal measure for 6 years. "I don't know what to do with this," she admitted quietly. "Every instinct I have, built over 5 previous performances, tells me to be suspicious of exactly this kind of vulnerability. And yet..." She stopped herself, shaking her head. "And yet?" Desung asked carefully. "And yet, I've never seen you like this," Naomi said honestly. "Not after the 3rd time, Not after the treatment facility. Not after any of it. This feels different, Desung, and that terrifies me more than if it felt exactly the same as before. Because I don't know if I trust my own judgment anymore about what's actually real with you. Before Desung could respond, his phone buzzed sharply on the table, followed almost immediately by Naomi's. Both of them glanced down, and Desung's face went pale as he read the message. Hey one sir. Chulman's people were spotted outside Naomi's aunt's residence in Gangwon County 20 minutes ago. I need you both somewhere secure. Immediately, Naomi looked up from her own phone. Alarm replacing the careful vulnerability of moments earlier. Desung. My aunt is being moved to safety right now, Desung said, already standing, his earlier stripped-down exhaustion transforming instantly into something sharper, more focused, the version of him capable of navigating exactly this kind of danger. Hey-one has a team en route. But Naomi, I need you to understand something happening right now that I haven't had the chance to explain. What? Naomi demanded, fear sharpening her voice. Desung, what is happening? Chulman, Desung said grimly, already moving toward the door, gesturing urgently for her to follow. The man I stepped down to distance myself from. The world I was trying to leave behind for good. He sees my withdrawal as weakness, an opportunity to move against interests I no longer directly control. He paused at the door, meeting her eyes with an intensity that made her stomach drop. And he apparently already knows exactly how to hurt me most effectively. Not through the business, through you. Naomi felt the ground shift beneath her. 5 days of careful, hard-won distance from Desung's world suddenly, violently colliding with a danger she'd never expected to touch her again. I thought you gave that world up, she said, her voice shaking. I thought stepping down meant this was over. I thought so too, Desung said grimly, pulling her toward the exit as security personnel materialized around them with practiced, urgent efficiency. But apparently, Naomi, walking away from power doesn't mean power stops trying to follow you. Especially not when someone believes you've made yourself vulnerable enough to finally strike. They stepped out into the street, into a black car already waiting, engine running, Hey-one's voice tight and urgent through Desung's phone, with updates Naomi couldn't fully hear. Where's my aunt? Naomi demanded, panic rising sharp in her chest. Desung, I need to know she's safe. We're finding out right now, Desung said, his jaw tight, his hand finding hers instinctively despite 5 days of careful, deliberate distance between them. I promise you, Naomi, whatever it costs me, I will not let anything happen to her. Or to you. The car pulled away from the curb, speeding through afternoon traffic, and Naomi sat frozen beside a man she'd left 5 days ago. A man who'd just voluntarily given up an empire, now thrust back into exactly the kind of danger she'd hoped he was leaving behind forever, with no idea, as the city blurred past the windows, whether they were driving towards safety or directly into something far worse than either of them had anticipated. Her phone buzzed one final time. A text from an unknown number. 3 words that made her blood run cold. Unknown. Found her already.